Hi, I'm Tracy Soltis, your leading health and nutrition coach and molecular biologist. I've consulted with hundreds of people around the world on their human journey. So if you're a seeker looking for answers, information and knowledge, you'll find it here. Come on a journey with me as I explore the science, the physical body, and the cognitive and energetic space of what it really means to be human. All right, welcome back everybody. And today I've got a very special guest joining me on the couch, Dr. Patrick Jones. Hi Patrick, how are you? Now, the work of Dr. Patrick Jones focuses on leading people to awaken to their true nature of inner well-being. With a previous background in clinical psychology for 20 years, he now, through teaching and research, brings the marriage of psychology and spirituality into the mainstream. Patrick has presented at state, national and international conferences in psychology and health and has been the director at Eastern ashrams and Western monasteries. He has experience in the commercial sector, having founded quite a number of companies and a not-for-profit charity, and has managed a portfolio of over dozens of properties. Welcome, Patrick.
Hi there. It's always an interesting intro because there's so many ways that we can play, and that's just a few of them, isn't it?
I know. Yeah. And you've been on before, so welcome back. And I'm so excited to have a chat with you today. And so for the people that haven't actually listened to our previous chat, maybe just recap who you are, what you're up to, all of the fun stuff right now.
Right. Okay. Well, the fun stuff at the moment is I'm writing a couple of books. One of them is just pre-release publication. It's a 30-day manual, if you like, self-help it's called the mindfulness-based quality of life and wellbeing program. So it's something that we created through the research and, got fantastic pre-post significant effects. Articles have been written on it. And now it's like, well, let's turn this into like a self-administered self-help book rather than it just being, these are some good ideas. Guess what? The research has found this is useful. Let's put it together in something that people can use.
Gosh, that must be so fulfilling.
Totally.
Right.
Yeah, it's been sitting there for a while. Let's be practical about this.
Yeah.
So that project's pretty much close to completion, pre-publication stage. It hopefully come out end of this year, beginning of next.
Yeah.
And then
done. Congrats on that.
Thanks.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
To me, honestly, taking research back into the community is like, I think, so relevant. People need to, I think in the academic space anyway, just always go, well, and how is this going to help people?
Yeah.
And ultimately, we have to always have that, I think, that service model almost.
Absolutely.
Anyway, yeah.
Yes.
So,
and then we've got our chat today, which is the 7 psychological stages of enlightenment. Yeah.
So that is the deep end, and I'm really happy to go and swim down there or sink.
Yep.
And actually, just we were chatting before, the second book that's coming out is more on the psychology of enlightenment, which has been a mixture of my process and the methods and mistakes, you could say, and then also some Q&As with students along the years in terms of their journey. And so part of what we're going to chat about today is just what's that process, and almost how do we bring some of those terms that are often Eastern or spiritual. Is there a place for them in the normal, or not normal really, but the mainstream psychological paradigms of well-being and so on? So we'll look at all that.
Excellent. And I can't wait. And the ego part of me is very curious for my own self, going, where am I going to fit within these stages?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, because I've read through all of the notes and I'm like, oh, that's familiar. Oh, yep. But I'm like, oh, there's a couple of areas here. I'm like kind of floating in between some of these spaces.
Totally.
So
and actually, Ken Wilber, who's written a lot of interesting stuff in this, does make the point that we might have like a sort of a default level, or almost like a maturity level, but it doesn't mean we can't sink and rise according to either certain experiences or certain decisions. So we might recognise ourselves in different parts.
Yep.
In some ways, this is almost like you've got developmental psychology. They look at, the various stages and needing to meet them. Otherwise, we get what they call like a developmental arrest, where someone has perhaps had some trauma or whatever it is, and they physically they're growing and socially perhaps and intellectually and so on, and yet they might be somewhere stunted in some emotional part because they couldn't get over that hurdle. They had to go around it, and so they have what we call a developmental arrest. And you won't know because they otherwise look great. So you could have a 7-year-old making infantile decisions in a board meeting with a major company because that
Yeah.
part's been triggered, right?
That's so interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, so we want to look at this from almost the actual spirituality. In my mind is also actualization of our potential. To me, it's
Yeah.
very much who are we as a human being, and there's a few angles to that, but I guess we're going to jump right into it, right?
Yeah, we really are. We really are. So let's get to it. So how about you run us through the very first stage?
Okay, so what I might do, at least just speak to the first bit, which is I might just occasionally check some points that are useful for us to hit.
Yes.
So typically, like any normal psychological journey, the journey of, I could say awakening to our true nature, I often like to describe it as a movement from unhealthy ego to healthy ego to no ego.
Yeah.
And usually psychology, which is why I never will, in a sense, cane my own sort of original tradition, is that its goal in some ways is to move people from that unhealthy ego to healthy ego, or from an unhealthy sense of self is another way of putting it, to a more healthy sense of self, a more robust one, a more resilient one, better coping skills. So in fact, when I did that 30-day mindfulness and quality life wellbeing program, it actually starts off looking at highlighting how important it is to have our life working from a functional point of view, because it's sort of the psychological foundation, it needs to be kind of healthy.
Yeah.
So I always think in a way that's step one. So it's really important, but my critique, I guess, of psychology now is that we shouldn't just stop at, you could say, that unhealthy ego to a healthy sense of self and then stop there, because there's a place beyond.
Yeah.
And I think I'm staggered how much we're sold short of our potential.
Yeah.
The ceiling is too low, and that's why my critique now also, while I think the mental health conversations now are so important, destigmatizing, getting people to actually get help. In New York, everyone has their analysts, and like it's time in Perth, we actually managed to go, well, it's okay to go and get some counselling.
Yeah. Finally, though, it's okay that there's now this removing of the stigma behind. Having a healthy mind is just as important as having a healthy physical body.
Yeah,
finally.
And also healthy finances and healthy everything else, right?
Yeah.
The top 5 quality of life areas that the research says make up, an important part of self-report of quality of life, are relationships, work, money, health, leisure. If we're missing one of these, we generally don't report good quality of life.
Yeah.
Having said that, the research has found that only makes up 20% of, and I'm being generous, it's the meta-analyses can be between 5 and 15%, but let's say 20, that only makes up 20% of the predictor value of well-being. It's like, so in other words, they could be going great and I could still be reporting low well-being somewhere. The other 80% is my mental state in relationship to those things.
Yeah.
Hence, if I'm more, opportunity focused or pessimistic, could say that'll influence me. Yeah. So, linking back to our topic, but these are kind of initial, important, foundational, topics, right? Is that we need to get. I believe it's important to have highlight the need to be functional in our lives.
In a holistic way as well. We've got to look at all of the areas, not just one, and kind of like be narrowing in on one specific area, right?
Yeah. And typically we might be a little better at a couple.
Yes.
And then it's like, okay, my tendency is to just let that one slip. So we could be, like a workaholic or something and really nailing lots of things and even be good at conflict resolution skills, which are great for relationships, decent organizer, managing budgets and profit and losses. And, have a 3 times a week gym routine.
Yeah.
And we've ticked everything, relationships, work, money, health, but we just don't stop. So the leisure one is like, so can you report good quality of life? No, I'm, just don't have enough time.
It's I'm living in high stress all of the time. So
Right.
I don't have time to do all of the things that actually bring me joy, which is relaxing or finding a hobby or something.
Flow states.
Yeah. I don't have time for that because I'm so focused on achieving all of the time.
Yeah. And then other people are super good at doing not much and they're more on that, Tomasic, slightly lazier side.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, great. When it comes to leisure, we don't need to train you up at all. You're good at that. But you do need to perhaps look at some responsibility in terms of, like budgeting or managing your time. So those 5, I think, point is we need to have them in balance and to keep our eye on all of them. But, in a sense, what we're going to be looking at today is that sort of that other 80%, which is my mental state. But it's not just in relationship to those. And if I can, I know we're going to jump into these stages, but I used to do some work with a stockbroker who was super good and used to train others. But he came to me to learn a little bit more about the emotional psychological response to trading, and that potentially when you get disturbed or distressed, you tend to trade more irresponsibly because you're fear-based or something or other. And to me, it really struck me. It's like those shares were a little bit like those 5 quality of life areas. When they go up, potentially our well-being goes up, but when they go down, our well-being goes down. Because we're so tied to their status. So step 1 is to get them right, but then step 2 is to try and separate my well-being from their status. So if they're going up or down, because that's life, the nature of phenomena is it's impermanent, it is always changing, either increasing or decreasing, we can have found another place which we source our well-being from that's the untouchable state of being. And that's what we're going to explore today.
Yeah, I can't wait. Oh. Yay. Let's do it.
All right. Okay. So that's the kind of preamble, yeah?
Yeah.
But I think it's good to validate the initial stages, and now we move into the add-on bonus, well, in reality, the extension of what's possible.
This is the juicy stuff, because this is where we really want to be working, let's be honest. I mean, yes, we want to have good careers and good relationships and good lifestyle factors, but at the end of the day, we have to tap back into ourselves, and this is where all of the juiciness is.
Yeah. And well, I need no convincing on that one. But I'm just happy in a sense to have kind of like repeatedly given the nod to the main work that is being done, and just more, it's an invitation that there is more, and we shouldn't just settle. Again, the research says that the average, like across 140 nations, they've, done all the testing, people self-report quality of life as about 7 out of 10, which is kind of good. It's kind of what you want. It's what they call, we have a positivity offset. It's not like average is 4 or we seem to be skewed positively. But I always used to think 7, okay, good. And when my people went through my programs, they'd come in around 40 out of 100 and leave about 65 to 70. So it's like, good. But I was like, why aren't you interested in that 70 or 100? Let's.
Yeah.
So today we look at that. And so I see it more as an invitation, let's be more.
Yes.
Let's, what is it? It's not just the unexamined life's not worth living, but St. Augustine put it really well. He said, we are restless, O Lord, until we rest in you. There's somewhere, if I'm happy with those 5 quality of life areas going well, and it's like, I am now happy, you're not listening to yourself. It's not enough.
Yeah.
It doesn't have the capacity to deliver union, to deliver oneness, to deliver an untouchable space. It's just not its ephemeral and impermanent things just don't have that capacity because they keep changing. So it's like, I think we've got to listen to some of that dissatisfaction, because it's pointing us to the fact that this machine is made for more.
Yeah. And just think, and like just on a side note, if we took all of those things away, what would there be left? It's like if you took away the job and you took away the relationship, you took away all of those other those 5 things. You take them away. What is there? Is there that sense of self? Is there that sense of awareness or fulfillment within oneself that's different to having all of those things as well, right? And that's what we want to get to. Yeah,
and I remember it reminds me of a mystic that was in the Christian tradition who was complaining to God about, the presence of suffering, and he's like, why? And the response was, if I could find another better way to teach you, I would.
Yeah.
In a sense that it's obviously a poetic way of putting it, you could say, but it's when those things do get taken away that we get to see what actually is there. What's our batting average once stuff isn't supporting us?
Yeah.
And that's the clue. So we want to be able to get to that place. For example, when I was talking in the beginning about the properties and blah, 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 I had a truckload of properties pre-GFC, and they all got smashed. And it was a great practice point for, just how are you when your projects dissolve in front of you?
Yeah.
It's like that's when you get to see with the gaps.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes, you do.
Whatever they are.
Yes.
Alrighty. So let's just say the first state before we hit the stage one is what I might call the egoic identification. And this is sort of the normal way of living, where we identify more with, as we've highlighted, with external events, and where we, experience pleasure if things go well, pain if things go badly. And it's not like we're not good people, there aren't insights, but we could say that we aren't at this point connected to a state of well-being independent of those events. So in a sense, our well-being comes from the quality of, usually in the research again, it says it's two parts. It's those life conditions and how well they're going, and my thinking process about those life conditions. So they've got to go well, those life conditions, or I've got to have a positive mindset about those life conditions. So it's what we call objective phenomena, which is life events, and the subjective phenomena, which is our mental events. Those two all have to be going well for well-being to be reported. But if we can do that well, we're functional, have our life events going well, and we're a constructive, positive thinker, then we should report good old 7 out of 10 happiness. Like, well done, we're doing this model properly.
Yeah.
It's what I would call an event-based well-being model versus an inner well-being model.
Yeah.
It's positive thinking and it's constructive, but it's still in relationship to the status of life events. And what we're going to be looking at today is that place beyond.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of the pre-state, and that's the normal, regular person who's living their life and doing it as well as they can.
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions that before we hit?
No, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And that's where I feel like a lot of people sit.
Yes.
Yeah, like a lot of people
and
sit.
psychology as well. It's about trying to help people get more resilient, get more, get their goals, da-da-da-da.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Hit us with
Without further ado.
Hit us with the juicy stuff.
Let's hit it. Okay. So what I love about the emergence of mindfulness, and this is now, you could say, stage one. It's a model I've constructed, based upon psychological, spiritual paradigms. People could maybe even add or take away a stage, but these are 7 that kind of represent it. Stage one is really the advent of mindfulness, is one way to put it. And what I love about the mindfulness bit is simply the distinction that we can step back from our thoughts and not be them.
Yeah.
And there's a lovely line that they use in mindfulness, which is instead of like, I'm just so bad at this, whatever it might be, you step back and you go, I'm having the thought that ... I'm so bad at this. As soon as someone develops that capacity, they're now observing thinking, as we call it, a passing mental event. It's not actually reality. It's something that just simply occurs in my head, often and involuntarily and repeatedly. Rumination is just a cycle of the same negative stuff on repeat with just different themes. So mindfulness, you could say, stage one is where we have seen that we can actually step back from our thoughts, feelings and sensations and observe, I'm having the experience that ...
Yeah.
So I like to separate this stage, and this is what I do in the 30-day one, is separate this stage into 2 parts, clear mind, open hearts. Because we're thinking and feeling people and sensing people, I like to separate them. So I call clear mind is the ability to step back and watch those thoughts coming and going, seeing them, in mindfulness would say, neutrally and non-judgmentally.
Yeah.
Being in the present moment. And I also like to add open heart, which is it's not just watching, which is clear mind. It's open heart is also allowing. So allowing feelings and sensations. Because if we just watch everything, the traps for young players that we can get very detached and aloof. One of the dangers of spiritual practice, it's not the outcome, but it's one of the traps.
Yeah.
So you kind of get that, slightly husky voice. Yeah, it's all good,
Yeah.
Which it might be, but right now, is one allowing the feeling and the sensation without resisting it. So clear mind, open heart.
And this is actually, I know we're in stage one, but this is actually a difficult one for people as well, right?
Absolutely. This is a massive shift, just this one.
Yes, I know, because having the ability to go, okay, a thought is not a fact. Just because I'm thinking it doesn't make it real, right?
Yep.
But then also to go, okay, these are really uncomfortable and negative sensations I'm having from the body, in the body. Like, what is this, and why is what's coming up for me? And, and we have a choice at this point. We can either lean into that and go, oh, this is worth exploring, or we can go, yeah, nah, I'm not exploring this, and step back away from it. And then we never really get through this stuff that we're actually, our body's bringing to our attention to work through.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And to be fair, sometimes people do not have the skill set at that point. And as long as they're aware, whatever we resist persists, you might have to come round to it another time. Perhaps you need to go get some training. This is, that we talked about there, almost the COVID demythologizing of the therapeutic process, and how now people can feel more comfortable doing that. Perhaps it's time. And again, just jumping into the research on resilience that's relevant here. They talked about this adaptation reflex thing, which is, most traumas they found you can generally adapt to between 8 to 12 weeks, no matter what the thing is. There are some outliers or exceptions, but typically what happens is when people get stuck is when they don't have the skill sets or the resources. And so it might be like 7 out of 10. They get a trauma or an upset. It brings their well-being state, say, down to 4. And then they say the whole psyche, they almost see it as, a natural homeostasis in the body, just like it self-heals. The psyche has this self-healing propensity to want to go back up to 7, and it starts looking, a bit like, looking for white blood cells. It starts looking for the things that it needs to do to get it back up to homeostasis where it was.
Yeah.
So social buffers, it starts talking to people, and it starts reframing the event, or it starts avoiding the people or whatever. But my job is to get back up from 4 out to 7, right?
Yes.
And typically we're good at that. We end up doing that. When an event occurs that's too much for us, we're 7 and we hit 4, we just can't get back up.
Yeah.
And that's what the terrible thing is, that now our baseline of well-being can be now 4.
Yeah.
And that person's now chronically depressed or whatever else, because they just couldn't negotiate with the resources they had, the demands of that event.
Yeah.
And at times like this, counselling is indicated, right?
Yeah.
This is when you go, when you can't do it through your own resource base, go get someone who's skilled up and has done 100 of these already to help you through, be that catalyst for you.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
Yeah, like to kind of give a nod to people when they find that hard to answer that this time. Go get some training, then return to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Support is so important. Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah. All right.
So as you highlighted, this one is a big one, and people can stay in this stage continuing to master and get better psychologically. And it is still going from unhealthy ego to healthy ego, or unhealthy senses of self to more healthy senses of self, stepping back and going, geez, that's just a thought. And wow. Oh, there's one other nice tagline which is really useful for this one is, and what this reminds me of from my past is ... That's super helpful.
Yeah.
Because I remember once I was doing some work with a couple and some accounting thing, I can't remember, and she was having a way big overreaction to his poor budgeting something. It was like really emotionally, really disturbed. And I get it was annoying, but there was a bit more to it, right? And so I said, so can we just use this phrase, what this reminds me of from my past is ... He said, my dad got imprisoned for embezzlement.
Here we go.
Okay.
So we get to it,
now
right?
we know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And so it's like, hubby didn't make the connection. She didn't really make the connection. It's like sometimes we're struggling with what this is, and there's more to it than just this event. So they're two good ones, I'm having the thought that ... steps me back, that I can't do this. And what this reminds me of my past is ... Yeah. They're just little handles or hooks. They help with the mindfulness process of that stepping back.
Yeah.
And we can do lots of work in that space for years, and get increasingly more mature.
But it gets easier. Like, that's the thing. Like, the more that we're actually tackle these things and actually go, oh, this is juicy and interesting, the less they come up, because you've worked through a lot of the reoccurring ones. And then when you do have something come up, it's actually like, oh, hello, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And it's you kind of process it a lot easier and quicker. Would you think?
Totally. And some people complain, it's like, Patrick, I've done this one, why is it not changing? It's like, well, it probably had about 12 layers to it, and you've definitely, extinguished your response is not how it used to be.
Yeah.
There's just a little bit more to go. Just hang in there.
Yeah. Hang in there.
Yeah. So that's the first stage, is the advent of mindfulness, the ability to step back from not being my thought, feeling or sensation experience. You kind of indicated in a way the lead into step 2, which I call the purification stage, which is where there is a significant releasing of our attachments. And typically our identity is often connected to these top 5 quality of life areas, to my status, in terms of relationships and where I am, or how I'm seen, or my work, whether my vocational satisfaction or peer observations.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, there's so much good. Sorry, I've just got one more research one on the work one. It's just so fascinating. Oh, there's a few, but they did a study, 2 groups of people. One, they offered you could get an absolute increase in income, or first one was your income could increase, yes, absolutely, like you'll get more income, but all your peers that are close to important to you would get a higher increase, right? So you would actually be inferior to your peers, but you'd still have more money. Option 1 is your income stays the same, and they have either a diminishment, or you end up looking better, in a sense, amongst your peers.
Yeah.
And people found it really hard to take the money.
Yeah.
Because, I don't want to look like I'm no good at my career amongst people important to me.
Yes.
Yeah. None of us are proud of those tendencies, but they're within us, right? Because it comes from survival and, not being picked off in the pecking order and, in the jungle and yada, yada.
Absolutely.
Still. Anyway, so in this purification stage, we get to meet some of our identifications with those relationships, work or money, or where we are in any of them. And over time, we begin to, through the watching and the stepping back, those senses of self don't become so controlling. We have a little bit more choice around them. Yeah? So they're starting to release, if you like. Typically, we either do this through self-help processes, or usually in groups, or with a teacher or a trainer, or counselor of any type, you could say. Over time, in this next stage, we should, and you've highlighted this just earlier, begin to feel just a bit lighter.
Yeah.
Almost like the psychological mother load is just less in here, And this stage could lead to issuing in the next stage, which is some awakening or opening experiences. But this next stage, this second stage, I call the purification stage, which really is about continuing to let go where I turn up as an identity, where I must, in a sense, be looking good in some area.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they always turn up, and they'll always be in our face, and we have that fork in the road. Am I going to feed this one or starve it?
Yeah. And letting go of attachments is so freeing, though. When you agree,
the outcome is freeing, the process is not so fun.
No, it's not fun at all, because some of it's really hard. Absolutely. Some of the things that you have to let go in order to feel freer and to feel lighter can be difficult things, especially depending on your upbringing and your childhood and things like that, where maybe you didn't have something. And so you've spent, a really long amount of time conditioning yourself to have all of the things because you missed out on them.
Yeah.
And then when you get to this point,
overcompensation.
Yes. Yeah. And you're like, I know I'm going to be happier if I let that go. But that's that underlying habitual survival instinct that goes, I just can't quite do it. Like I want to do it, but I can't do it.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's where the baby steps, I think, is important. And again, in the Buddhist notion of mindfulness, it's not just neutral, non-judgmental awareness. They also pair it with loving kindness. And increasingly, the research they're talking about, you need to have these together. So in other words, doing that watching, doing that stepping back, doing that letting go, but within a quality of kindness to self. As I always say, if at least you're not on your own side, it's a problem. I mean, sometimes there won't be anyone on your side about the particular event or topic, but make sure at least you're there.
Yeah, you got to be on your own team.
Yeah.
You have to.
Yeah.
This is the thing, the mentality of believing in yourself and knowing that your self-worth. So knowing your own self-worth, knowing that you're enough in this lifetime, but you have the potential to be and do anything that you want to do as long as you're able to let go of all of the things that are holding you back, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's where people get caught up, is that they feel like they need to have all of the things or be all of the things as a responsibility to other people, but really they're more responsible to themselves. That was a big car that just went past. That was when I actually heard that one through the headset. But yeah, they have this inability to let go because it's so important for them to have that approval from their peers, and that can hold them back on becoming the real leader in their space that they're supposed to be.
Yeah, well, that dovetails into the research on self-esteem. The number one predictor is social comparison.
Yeah.
And again, linked to survival, and it makes sense that somewhere, I think is it the baboons or whatever, they walk in a hierarchy, from whatever, right from the top up to the young, weak and frail and old at the other end. And somewhere our job is to make sure that we're at the top end, not the bottom end, because we don't want to be picked off by the predators of the modern jungle.
Yeah.
But realistically, whilst that might have some actual relevance from a point of view of people making choices in life in terms of whether it's partners or careers and it's all event-based happiness. And ultimately we want to be able to go, yes, function as best I can, but just don't have my well-being resting on that approval rating.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just say we're doing all that and we're letting go and we're being kind in our slowness of change, because sometimes it's like, oh, it's still here, or it's happening again, but there's a kindness in that process. But over time, through repetition and persistence, there's a increasing lightening, you could say, in the psychological load that we carry. That's the unnecessary bit.
Yeah.
Which then can issue us into the third stage, which is literally what I would call the awakening stage, or awakenings, plural, where there can be intermittent gaps in the normal sense of identity, and they can start to occur, and you can create, or not you can create, but what is created is just a sense of lightness or expansion, which we could call almost where we temporarily just aren't almost as a self relevant to be there. It's just we're in the moment, almost. You could say you're one in the moment.
Yeah.
And when we have these, and again, research found that, a quarter to a half of people have reported at some stage in their life having some experience without any training. And it might just be through some kind of event that occurs, and it could be beautiful sunset, end of a hike on a mountain, or, it could be a moment of love. It could be something where it just all stops.
Yeah.
Time stops, and we're now in that unconditioned realm. And the self is, at that point, is not even relevant. It's just absorption.
Yeah.
That's another term that they use. But typically, because that's not our batting average, we're not typically that operating from that place, it quickly closes.
Yeah. And
then we remember it. It's what we'd call a state versus a trait. It's not an ongoing experience. Now, often people don't recognize it for what it is, but it is potentially a mini enlightenment or awakening experience.
Yeah.
It's just they can't hold it.
Yeah.
And sometimes they can be very intense. Sometimes it's just very light. But, sometimes people can go, yeah, wow, like years ago there was this experience. It only lasts a few seconds, but my God, at that moment, wow.
Yeah.
So that's the one, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So that's stage 3 where those occur, but they happen intermittently.
Yeah.
And the only reason they would start to be able to increase is if we're employing a regular method or training or something.
Yeah.
But the difference is that they're chalk and cheese from our normal way of life. Right at that moment, we're in untouchable realm. It's like it doesn't matter. And we may have had all kinds of stuff going down. That's why I see this, to be honest, as the it's like the secret weapon, to be honest. When you get to be able to access this way of being, then whatever you might have been managing, at least in any context, is temporarily just completely gutted of all power.
Yeah.
And it's just, no matter how significant or real it is, you might be literally on the edge of a beheading, which can be quite useful at that point.
Yeah, absolutely.
And at that point, nothing matters.
Yeah.
Because it won't. So
Yeah.
So anyway, they're rare, and they usually do occur in response to a good method, but they can be triggered by other things, or even meditation. Sometimes people will have that moment.
Yeah.
But the point is, with practice and consistent method, they can increasingly occur until eventually where we'll be going is this will be the default from which one lives one's life in the world.
Yeah, imagine that.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that I've had these experiences before and can even pinpoint exactly when and how long and what's happened and all those sorts of things, but it hasn't really been like a long period of time. So while I go in and out of them quite regularly, I don't have them for a long duration.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think that that's fairly standard in some ways, maybe a little bit, I don't know.
It's not standard in the sense that it's a result of method.
Yeah.
You know, whatever method you're using that's enabling you to increasingly lighten that, psychological load and dispose you to more and more of those experiences.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then over time, theoretically, if you're continuing to what I would call clear the in tray versus keep putting more in the in tray, then in tray in a sense would have like the backlog of all the past in it.
Yeah.
But if we're slowly clearing the past and not putting more in that in tray, then the overall load should just get lighter and lighter, and that predisposition or propensity to have those experiences should occur more and more.
Yeah.
And then the job at that point, using all psychological terms, is to increase the frequency of them, the duration of them, and ultimately the intensity of them.
Yeah.
We're wanting to be very shrinkish about it, but
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Shall we move into the next stage?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So as we wade our way down the pool till we get submerged, so the stage 4 is what I call, the change of reference. So with practice, these methods can build increasingly those events. And what starts to happen is one has a sense of just being a bit lighter overall, and these intermittent experiences of just being, in a sense, in an untouchable place.
Yeah.
Is there is a drawing to more stillness and to life conditions that are conducive for this. People's interests begin to change a little bit. You could almost say it's an authenticity shift from that which was not so true starts to be less drawing, less relevant. And the things that are more conducive to this, what I would call now, you could say the no-self experience, starts to occur. Because life events, that are supportive of this become more relevant and more attractive, you could say. And so sometimes this integration stage, which is, can also be called that, it can invite, changes in our jobs. It's like somewhere this is just not sitting as truly for me. It's just not resonating with, my core, whereas before we might have been so disconnected from that core that we didn't really hear it, and we were driven by other motivators, what we call, extrinsic motivations, like needing to be successful in a certain area because that was really made us feel good from a social comparison point of view. As our attachments dissolve, some of those motivations have less power.
Yeah.
And therefore, sometimes some of our life was constructed around those things holding it together. And as they thin out, we start to become more authentic, and it always creates problems, I got to tell you. It always, as you say, is a challenge or an opportunity. Ultimately, it is an opportunity.
Yes.
But when our life starts to have to reconfigure because the drivers that got us to do the things are just simply not sitting inside us anymore.
Yeah.
It's like, well, man, I've just got this degree, or I've got this how do I... What do I do with this? Do I refashion it or do something else? Or
Yeah. You spend all this time trying to do one thing, and then all of a sudden this is massive spiritual shift, and you're like, that's not in alignment with what I am anymore. And you've got, well, how am I going to bring all of that knowledge and experience into who I am now? And there's that sense of feeling like you've just wasted your time, essentially, maybe, perhaps.
Yeah,
but you really
Sure.
haven't. You've still learnt certain things that had to get you to the point where you're at.
Yeah.
But those things might not be in alignment with you anymore. And so I feel like there's this grappling, this this like wanting to hold on to something that you know is not going to serve you because it's not where you need to go, but because you've invested so much of yourself into it, it's so difficult to let it go at the same time. So this stage definitely resonates with me because I feel like when you step into your true and authentic self, not only do you have to deal with your own disappointment of what you thought was going to happen and rejuggle those around, even though things are going to be amazing, right? You know, like I know this now that things are actually work out for the better, but you also have this guilt essentially of your responsibility to other people as well, in that, you know what, I'm probably not aligned with this anymore, and relationships are going to have to shift.
And then that also then has to be faced and accepted that if I deconstruct that guilt, it's genuine care for people and also trying to listen to myself and have care for what's true here. And then how do I navigate or negotiate caring for both in a way that works?
And you know, it takes a lot of courage to do that. And I say that to people who might be listening and in this sticky bit right now, because I feel like this is a sticky bit, in that it takes courage to make that decision.
And it's repeatedly.
Constantly.
Being offered,
Constantly, But the thing is that once you make that decision and you take that leap of faith, the universe rewards you in so many ways you can't possibly imagine. Like it's just one of those things when you finally surrender and give in to who this true authentic being is that you are. The universe things become easier. They become lighter. They're less taxing on you. You just go through life going, okay, well, there's still ups and downs, but you're not involved in the trauma and the highs and the lows of all of these things all of the time. And life does become easier, I think, but it's making that choice.
Yes, and I think with the baby steps idea is like, what can I do now? Because sometimes it's just like I can't make that jump, but what can I do? I can do this bit. And then and again back to that kindness place is that it's not like there's not a rush here. You know, like we just need to do that which is true now and that which is true tomorrow as best as we can. And it may take days, weeks, months, years, this particular transition. And that's okay.
Yes, that's the time factor. Because I know for me, like when everything shifted and things came in really quite intensely, when I make decisions now into the world, like things just, and it's a true decision, the universe knows straight away. So things just go, oh, okay, we're shifting. Okay, everything's like coming in really hot and fast. And that takes a lot of, I guess, to sit with that without it being overwhelming, and then go, okay, well, how am I actually going to process this, and how am I going to give love and compassion to others as well who might not share that same space with me anymore, because, you know, as a being, you have a responsibility to, you know, shift yourself, but also be aware of how those things are going to impact others around you. And so it can be a daunting task. And so I guess my thing to anyone listening is, yes, baby steps, absolutely baby steps, but own your truth and authenticity too. Would you think?
Yeah, because I mean, you're also right. Once, you know, you hit some alignment things, there can be all kinds of fast synchronicity things that happen that highlight that's in the right groove. So
it's interesting, isn't it?
It is.
It's so interesting. All right.
So where we're kind of going in a sense with this is that these shifts do invite these changes, and, you know, it is that kind invitation, which is always voluntary, to step up and be true to ourselves. And they can happen in any of the areas that are previously have been really important to us. And the only reason often they're being challenged is because they were true to some program that's now dead now or irrelevant.
I love that. The program, I love that.
And so now we need to, like, you know, step up. So over time in this stage 4 change of reference, there is this shift in terms of interest slowly more from event-based to inner well-being. And most people can spend their their work in this stage and their life in this stage. And it's a beautiful stage, you could say. It's slowly clearing and being more and more authentic increasingly. Usually what happens is people can reference this, what I might call also the non-dual place or the no-self place or the union or the oneness, as you could say. Tolle talks about, the presence, if you like. So the access is intermittently possible, but it's not, in a sense, their go-to. They don't just come from that as a default or be able to go, okay, I'm just going to sit and fall into that now because it's just sitting here.
Yeah.
It's more intermittent, but it's wonderful that that's a reference point, but it's just not the default as yet. But I see it as the natural state of a human being, so the goal ultimately is to make that the default because it's actually just who we are underneath.
Yeah.
There can be, with good method, you can basically begin to keep enlightening, you could say, to the point to where it then stabilizes, which issues us into stage 5, which is the stabilization stage. So this is kind of where we're now moving more into the rare country. But to be honest, that when we discuss the first stage, which is the mindfulness stage and that stepping back, that's incredibly rare as well. Really when I think about where people's focus is. Not a lot of people do have a real method to try and work with their thought, feeling, sensations and being able to step back and look at it and be responsible. So that's already rare. But the further we go along here, the less this happens, even though I see it as as they say, a Buddha is simply an ordinary human being at last.
Yes.
We're talking about human potential here. So it's that's why I always like to land this stuff in the mainstream. It's actually just our nature.
Yeah.
So again, the Buddhists, they would talk about it as Sahajra Samadhi is another term in Hinduism, which is the natural resting state. I just love it, like that natural resting state.
Yeah.
Anyway, so in this stage 5 of stabilization, these intermittent openings or awakenings become increasing in their frequency, duration, intensity, until eventually, in a sense, they become more where you come from than not. You're more in that than not. You're more like flipping out of it, but it's more just becoming, this is where I come from. It's characterized by an increasing simplicity or ease or flow or flexibility with everything. And the shift, in a sense, is that the single point of a me just starts to increasingly become less relevant. And there's more there's just a space, if you like. The sense of me is more space. So over time, that default that was originally a kind of a me, I think this and I feel that, and if that goes well, I'm going to be okay. It more becomes the primary mode, you could say, than that original egoic state. So we've gone now from unhealthy ego to more healthy ego, and we're really clearing, and then these intermittent stages of just no self are starting to come through intermittently based on regular method. And eventually, at a certain point, that default sense of self place, we're just in it less and less. And then at a certain point, potentially, it just goes as a default and is gone.
Yeah.
And then the default now is just space.
Yeah.
The natural resting state of a human. Because let's face it, I love it. I've written a few articles on the relevance of neuroscience now as they're looking at some of this stuff, to be honest. It's quite fascinating. And one of the terms they talk about is the brain's capacity for selfing, which is being able to construct senses of self based upon interpretation of data. It puts it all together and, excuse the simplification, you read the science, it's interesting. Articles on that. Well, basically, mindfulness-based heroism, can we create enlightened heroes?
Yeah.
Anyway, I've written a few things. I can't even remember the names anymore because whatever they were written. But essentially, what's interesting is that it's been constructed somewhere in the mind and it can be interrupted. And they found, like, if someone has a grand mal seizure, temporarily, since it interrupts some of the brain's capacity to do its processing, and they get a temporary interruption of the sense of self.
Yeah.
And we would call that a spiritual experience.
Yeah.
In mindfulness or meditation, you can get this interruption of this selfing. So this last stage of stabilization, I see it as the kind of almost, it's a bit kind of negative almost, but this imposter sense of self, this thing that's optional, this construction of a self just doesn't happen. It just becomes irrelevant. It just fades increasingly through the good practice and the letting go and all the hard work we've been talking about, or the natural seeing, if we want to not call it work. And then now here we are just in that resting space.
Yeah.
So we might call this person, awakened or awake, and some people, would call this person enlightened. I like to distinguish them because, being, having had 20 years as a shrink and then doing all the research, I think we need to be really careful how we describe everything.
Yeah.
But this space typically is the spiritually awakened space. And in Buddhism, they also might call enlightenment the end of suffering, or they call it liberation. And it's the liberation from one of my teachers used to say, no ego, no problem. If there's now no sense of self, what can get insulted?
Yeah.
What can get burnt by anything? It's just the untouchable space.
Yeah.
And yet, the wonderful thing, it's not nihilism. I think that, I have a theology degree as well, and so I don't like to cane, my dear Catholic Church tradition, but they did a critique of Buddhism. They said, well, it wasn't what they call didn't have the stamp of papal infallibility. It wasn't seen to be a true, necessarily theologically correct. Anyway, it was a position. Sorry for those distinctions, but
it's good.
They did say that it was a nihilistic religion, or one particular person, which they then got caned for, and they had to do lots of very subtle retractions.
Yeah.
The reason why I'm saying that is because no self is not nihilistic. It's not, or another beautiful term, but again misleading, is they also call it emptiness in the Buddhist tradition. But some people like to call it empty full.
Yeah.
Chopra talks about it as, a place of infinite potentiality.
Yeah.
It's the space of who we are, but the quality of that space is aware.
Yeah.
Or we now also can call it awareness, which means that when this is stabilized, this way of being, it's just a space that's now aware, and it processes through the human vehicle that we have that's made up of basically three functions, or three cogs in the wheel, thought, feeling, sensation vehicle, that this aware space expresses through.
Yeah.
So here we have our life back again. We get to be fully human again, but just free to think, feel, and sense through this amazing vehicle called human.
Yeah.
And so you're now finally an ordinary human being at last.
Yeah. And that's funny, isn't it? Because I'm listening to all this and I'm thinking about this and how it relates to myself and everything. And I feel like it's hard for people to let go of self. It's so hard. So you could go through all of these stages, and then when you get to that very pinnacle moment where it's like you're going to become the ultimate human, but you've got to give up self. There's no self. It's empty. And I love that about Buddhism because I've studied it myself, and some of the messages can be quite dark. They can appear to be dark, but they're actually not dark. They're actually the letting go of everything and stepping into the true authentic self, right? Yeah. But the death it's essentially the death, the Buddhist death. Yeah,
there's the death of the false, but it's still a death.
It's still death, and people are scared of death. So letting go of that very last grapple or hold on to the self, I feel like that ultimately was what holds many people back, because they can't get there. They just can't get there. Yeah. I'm not saying I'm there either, but do you know what I mean? I feel like it's that daunting finale use of the word that everyone gets hung up on, and if we can push through that, there's this amazing abundance of everything on the other side.
And what's interesting is that you don't know when it could happen.
Yeah.
It's because I see it as there's almost like multiple senses of self, you know, in relationship or financial or whatever those, you know, those quality of life areas. And as we dissolve and let go, I don't know, this could be the last one.
Yeah.
You know, there's so many. And yes, there is a sort of an overarching, overwhelming sense of a me, but it still plays out through topics.
Yeah.
And so in a way, it really is, can I just let go here in this one and in this one?
Yeah.
And then sometimes it's just, that's why I like, you know, frequency, duration, intensity. Like it's, if we can open ourselves to more of these experiences of just beyond our pedestrian, petty little sense of self, sometimes grasping and controlling.
Yeah.
We're just lightening, as you said in the kind of the beginning, lightening that way of being. And then, yeah, it's just increasingly making it more possible to be just freer and freer. And then eventually it just becomes, we're able to stay there a little bit longer.
Yeah.
And we stay there a little bit more often. And it's a little bit more, it's a little deeper, it's more blissful, a little bit more empty. And then that just simply all increases.
Yeah.
Until eventually it might just click over. And for some it's a very significant shift. And for others it's just the last hair that just needed to fall or whatever.
Yeah, the last apple to drop sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm curious to know, like, in your professional opinion, where do you think the majority of the population kind of sits at the moment in these stages? I know it's kind of general.
Oh, no, that's
it's a very general question.
Very easy to answer.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, pre-egoic before stage one.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? Right?
Typically the stage most people are at, you know, I also like, you know, using the theology. St. Thomas Aquinas, a 12th century theologian, or in the 12th century, he had a nice line that, you know, he said, man is essentially good, but with a tendency towards evil.
Yeah.
You know, or in Buddhism, it's like the Buddha nature or the true nature, but with this tendency towards ego grasping.
Yes.
So I think most people, I would see, this is why I like, you know, appeal to people's goodness, because I think it's the essential core of where we come from. And so most people, I'd say, would be in that space where they want to be good, they want to have a nice life, they prefer win-win to win-lose, but if there is a win-lose, they prefer to be the win, yeah?
Yeah.
So whilst in the final stages at the other end of this, equanimity is not just, it's so free and so whatever else, that it's not just happy with win-win, it's happy with win-lose where it's the lose.
Yeah.
Because it needs nothing. It needs nothing. So
yes.
It literally shifts.
Exactly.
The other way.
Yeah.
But I'd say in the first stage, I'd say most people are in that initial stage, just trying to be a good person, get through life, survive, and manage as much as they can those quality of life areas and be as good and a good person as they can.
Yeah.
Hitting stage one, and I think some people are in that first stage of practicing the mindfulness things, which I'm using that term, but people will use something completely different. Doesn't matter.
There's a whole different range of things.
But they'll be in that mainly that pre-egoic to stage one. Yeah.
It's just that awareness. Isn't it? That's coming
Building
to
the
that
awareness.
Little light bulb that goes off of self-awareness of going,
Yes.
oh, hang on a second, this is a repetitive cycle. Perhaps I could do something differently in this instance.
Yeah.
And it only takes that one change to then, I feel like, knock on so many others as well. And
I think where I'd say the shift is when someone goes to that first stage of what I'm calling the mindfulness stage of being able to step back. That's when now that person is interested in growing.
Yeah.
Like is interested in personal growth, is actively investing in how can I improve. Whilst I think the general population is just simply trying to be good, have a decent life, whatever else. To be honest, it is at times a little animal-like.
Yeah.
Where I just think that our consciousness our capacity to be conscious is so much greater than that.
Yes.
That I just think that we're selling ourselves short if we just try and look at, you know, building our resilience to have a decent life.
Yeah.
Because it's so event-based.
Yeah. Do you reckon that there's reasons for that. So some of the messages that we're given, and because the way that our society, I guess, is structured and built, does it allow for enough opportunity, I guess is where I'm going, opportunity for people to actually make the connection.
Yeah.
Do you think?
Yeah, well, in the old days, the church and state, old days from literally tribal up to only this century maybe, there's always been some kind of psychoeducational tool, whether it's religion or something or other, and so I think those methods have been continually taught.
Yeah.
I think now we're having to forage for ourselves and self-learn, because it's not so systemic or systematic in the institutions.
Yeah.
And I think you could argue, there'd be an interesting research topic, is just how much the mental health issues that are present now are also to do with the shift in education about whether it's virtues or values or something or other that helps me have skill sets to be able to live this life well.
Yeah.
That seems to be missing, and perhaps the effect of that is...
I think you're really right in that, because from my personal experience, I always knew there was more. I lived and actually have written a book chapter myself about this, which I'm sure you're aware of, which is coming out next year, Women of Wisdom. And for me, I always knew that there was more. I knew it, but I felt like that was the thing. I had to try and find it for myself. I couldn't kind of work out where to go or where to source or who to rely on and who to trust and what was right and what was wrong and all of these sorts of things, right? And so whilst I did some growth myself in this kind of trying to find my way, the moment that I stepped into a Buddhist temple, that was the pinnacle moment for me, because I was like, finally some information that makes sense to me, to be aware of my body, to be aware of who I am in this being.
Like you're offered a methodology you could understand and follow.
Yes, and that was the start. So it's obviously increased and changed so much and very rapidly since that moment. But I finally went, okay, like this is good messaging. This is good, like real connection of mind to body, rather than externalizing anything. It was that turning inward of what I had been looking for in different things.
Yeah.
So
and interesting, with the Dalai Lama talks about, Buddhism as more a science than a religion, or more a philosophy than a religion. It's more a methodology that, once people go, wow, that actually is quite useful for, human happiness.
Yeah.
I'm going to try,
There's a lot of reasons why there's plenty of scientists who are monks. Like that, there's so many of them, right?
Yeah.
You only have to go to our temple here and you've got physicists, have all, taken their vows, and now they're all teaching, right? So if Dhammaloka here in Perth, for example, a lot of the people teaching there, they're all physicists. They've all got many, many, many science degrees,
And they, for years in their purification process, they had to, because I knew them like a few decades ago, they were digging that massive wall along Serpentine.
Yeah.
Where it goes on for like kilometres. And I'm just imagining those guys with those degrees in the hot sun and going,
exactly.
What do I do in my life?
Exactly.
But that's the process of letting go, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Shall we just finish this stage and then we can...
yes.
See where we go with it. So in this final stage with the stabilisation, the default is now that no self. But what's interesting about this stage, and so people might call this, awakened, spiritually awakened, or I don't know whether woke, it's probably now got too many other connotations, but...
I like enlightenment, like pure enlightenment. Like
yes.
you said, the perfect
and
enlightenment.
What I'm doing here at the moment is I'm actually, in a sense, moving us to this next stage. It's where stage 6 is what I would call non-dual well-being, awakening, or enlightenment. So this stabilization stage is where it's slowly building, where this is the default is becoming more where we come from. In the stage 6, it's when that final default falls, default old sense of self that's intermittently a bit flimsy, and you're getting lots of space. Now, eventually that falls, and we sometimes talk about as, the apple falls from the tree. The last layer of resistance wears away, and now that default is the non-dual well-being state, or the awakening or enlightenment state, or no self.
Yeah.
So in that stabilization stage, lots of work is being done to slowly to lighten until you're more in that place than not, but it's just you're not there as the default anymore. In this stage 6, it's where it flips over, you could say, clicks over. So, just to clarify, that's actually the difference between those two. So how this affects things like, say, for example, meditation, where meditation before might be meditating on an object and trying to use that object like the breath or whatever else to kind of relax the mind or whatever it might be. Here now, meditation is simply turning that awareness, let's say looking out on the breath, is just turning it inwards, what Ramana Maharshi would call turning awareness onto awareness, just turning it inwards, because what's there now, the default is there is just simply space or awareness.
Yeah.
So the quality of this, it's characterized by this sense of space, emptiness, light, peace, and definitely the experience that now there's nothing more to get. There's no improvement in well-being that can happen as such in that space, because there's nothing to improve. It's just here. It's just here-ness, you could say.
It just is,
yeah? And this is it.
Yeah.
Now, so I would call this, the natural resting state, and now this is the default. The decreasing intermittent movement has fallen away, and now this is the new default. But you may look completely different internally, but externally you may look the same. So no one may know a thing that's happened. It's just this is just what's here, the default. Now, I do want to kind of highlight that in this, why I like to distinguish this state from my fifth, that was the fifth was stabilizing, sixth was the actual awakening.
Yeah.
The seventh stage, which I'll go to in a moment, but is what I would call perfect enlightenment. So in this sixth stage, which is the default now, is the no self, people will call this awakening or enlightenment, and it is, you could also say it's true. The danger with calling that enlightened at one level, because it's also true, but is that what's beautiful about this is that although the default is space now, there's still the unfinished psyche stuff that hasn't been met yet, which can arise and be triggered by life events, but it occurs to be seen in this space.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say this is the state, that most teaching is done from in the world, spiritual teaching, enlightenment teaching. And why I think it's good to clarify this is because people can teach from this place and there's still things within them that need to pass through, still the unfinished psyche. And I think we have to have, and to be honest, a little bit disconcerting, the lack of respect for the psyche that people have, and they think that once someone hits this awakening space, that the unbelievable complexity of the psyche and what's in this unconscious is all gone.
Yeah.
We're the most amazing, extraordinary mind that has so many associations. In this place, they can come through, and it's okay. It's just that it's more clearing. Things get triggered, but it's within a space now where the default is just light, empty.
Yeah.
And I do have to highlight, it's an extraordinary love.
Yeah.
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 Anyway, it's kind of like, as soon as you start to talk about it, it's completely pointless.
I can feel it. Yeah.
It just goes.
Yeah, I can feel that, because there's that freedom, right? That you've let go of everything. There's no attachments. There's nothing. There's nothingness. There's just being. Yeah.
And its power as well. There's this miraculous power about it that does stuff with no action being taken.
Do you feel it within your heart space? Do you feel like it resonates somewhere in your body, this feeling of love? Because I felt it when you were you know, when I lost you in that moment because you were reflecting so intensely about it, to come back to describe exactly what it was. And I was wondering where you went.
It does things to everything. Like, for example, now the room is all kind of light. And it just, once there's a kind of a turning, more direct turning, then everything just goes.
Exactly.
But it's hard then to do anything. Like, if you drop into that, then eventually everything just all
melts.
Functioning just
it melts.
disappears. And the big point was doing anything else.
So stay with me, Patrick.
That's right.
Keep looking at me.
You have to stay out and talk at the same time.
Keep you grounded in your space. Yeah.
And that's the lovely bit, is to hold both. To hold in and out at the same time. And then it's just a matter of where you put the percentage of awareness. So sometimes in the meditation, the awareness just goes only there. And there's for me in the meditations, I'll always hit the place where I can't move. And it's just because the absorption is just, it's unnecessary to have attention out. So it's just a natural love that just is, you fall.
Isn't it amazing how everything just comes back to love, a feeling of love? You know, it's what we all desire to have more of in our lives. And here we are, when we go through these stages, the pinnacle thing that's waiting for us at the end is love.
And it's such a surprise because it's a surprise.
Absolutely.
Effortless interest in others being okay, as opposed to the effort of, like, have to do X, have to do Y.
I can feel that. Like, there's nothing. It's fantastic. And so
we're gonna hit stage 7 just so that we can finish this properly. It's not gonna last.
I'm gonna lose him. You're gonna end up like gone into some realm. Like, hang on, Patrick, come back.
Stage 7 is when there is nothing to purify left. And so I would put people like the Dalai Lama, and this is my own estimations anyway, or Amma, who's an amazing Hindu teacher, and people might have theirs, of Sai Baba or whoever. People where there is nothing left, I would say, psychologically, in any place. And I would call, in some ways I'd reserve that, and perhaps the Yunkasei classic Buddhists perhaps would reserve enlightenment for that. Or perhaps we distinguish perfect enlightenment versus, awakening or enlightenment. And I want to highlight that, I guess, out of almost my profound, almost bowing down respect for those I'm in front of, where that's my experience of that. And yet the beauty of it is that they are no different than anyone. They're simply showing what human is when there's nothing left to clear.
Exactly.
So it's, what's God, what's divine, or whatever, or what's human doesn't really matter. I mean, to be honest, there's some interesting theological discussions, incarnational theology about God was made man and dwelt amongst us. It's in the Christian traditions, but in the Hindu traditions or Buddhist, I like to kind of keep it very, almost sidestep those religious paradigms and just say, what's the quality of a human being? And this is, we're talking about our potential as a human is this.
Yes, because we see it. And another person that actually had that impact on me was at Dharmaloka, which was Ajahn Brahm, who I'm sure everyone's very familiar with in Perth. He's pretty well known all around the world. But again, like when I stepped into Dharmaloka and had my moment and met Ajahn Brahm, and I've spoken to him multiple times, he is just such a phenomenal being. And you can see there's nothing, like there's just nothing. He holds on to nothing. It's just, he just is this incredible human. And that example, it's something to look at and just have so much respect for him and for the whole monastery and what they do, because they have nothing, they want nothing, they desire nothing, they are nothing. Do you know what I mean? Like it's just...
And then there's an offering back out to
all
be
they do
available
is
for others.
service.
Yeah.
All it is they offer service constantly. And to me, that definitely has structured part of me in what I do with my own work, and I know what you do with your work as well, is that offering of service, of giving of yourself and going, okay, it's okay to actually step into my true authentic self. There's nothing wrong with that, and owning exactly who I am and letting go of everything and everything I think that I'm supposed to be and meant to be in this world, and just being exactly what it is I need to be, and giving as much as I can to other people.
Yep.
So that I can help them shine as much.
Yep.
There's nothing more. There's nothing more.
Higher.
Nah, there's really not. There's nothing more that I get out of this joy. I literally cried the other day, and I'm talking a little bit about myself here, but this is not an ego thing. But I literally had a message from one of my clients saying, you know, she went to the doctors and she got all these test results back and her blood's all in normal, and how she is just so grateful of how much I've empowered her and have helped her step into her own space and become herself. And it's like, there's nothing more that I want for people than that, you know, and to be a catalyst of that and helping those people, you know, and you're exactly the same of all of the work that you do and the books that you're writing and the papers you've been publishing and everything. There's nothing better than that, right? Would you think? Except self-enlightenment.
Yeah, in the end, I totally agree, and I think in the end, it just becomes one action.
Yeah.
Which is being, doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so where to from here for you? You've got your books.
Yeah, I think I'm off to Malaysia in a few weeks to give a talk at a conference there. I do want to, I guess, offer this more out into the world and into the conference scene, I think, and obviously general teaching and training. My dharma, if you like, or calling, or might be trying to combine the two traditions, you could say, almost, of the spiritual, contemplative, mystical traditions with the mainstream, you know, academic, psychological.
Yeah.
And just say, well, what's a language that we can, so it can land, so that people can really hear something, so that it might help them move from almost pre-egoic into stage one, or have methods to make their way along this journey.
Yeah.
So my work really is to help people on this journey and use whatever tools I can get my hand on.
And so if people want to make contact with you and access your books and access anything that your publications and things like that, where can they reach you?
Probably pretty straightforward. Simply drpatrickjones.com.
Yeah.
And
can't get any simpler than that.
No, it should be there. Or the Facebook, which is Dr. Patrick Jones Official. I probably do a little bit more there with the videos and posts and things. But those the general stuff, I seem to be on Google. So
yeah, amazing. Yeah. Is there anything you wanted to say to the listeners before we wrap up?
Well, other than the love thing we've been talking about, I like the notion of the two wings of the bird, love and truth, to keep it in balance. And, you know, in my life I've had to sort of get them right. Sometimes it's important to speak the truth, but to do it within a context that lands well, so which is love. And I think it's important to have that combination, which is why I'm really strong on building a functional quality of life that's balanced and works as best you can, being skillful, and then also being, which I would call external quality of life, but then at the same time building that internal well-being, you know, the enlightenment space beyond that.
Yeah.
And I think once that foundation's there, then as we talked about at the end, the natural expression is others.
Yeah.
It just seems to happen that way. Which I'm saying, it was a surprise for me because I just wanted to build everything to be great. And I found that as those things, the needs dissolved, the interest for others seemed to just turn up as being the core thing. So, yeah.
Well, that was amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming in and chatting with me.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that we're going to be
doing
more stuff together. Absolutely. Yeah. I think this will be our last episode for 2022, but I'm sure you'll be back and joining me on the couch 2023.
Yeah, I already have some ideas. So,
oh, do you? Yay. Oh, I love that. I love it when people go, yes, I've got more ideas. That's fantastic. So thank you again so much for coming in and chatting. And yes, if you want to make any contact with Dr. Patrick Jones, you can hit him up at drpatrickjones.com, and make sure you keep an eye out for his amazing books as well. Make sure you go and grab yourself a copy of these books when they come out. That would be amazing.
And thanks for asking the great questions.
Oh, you're so welcome. I love it. And it comes from genuine curiosity. I can't help myself, right? And if you feel as though family and friends might value from this episode, please share them. This is a free offering. Everything that we do on this podcast is free. So please make sure you share this information as far and wide as you possibly can. But until next time, take care. See you later.
The information, views and opinions expressed on this podcast should not be used or treated as a substitute for nutritional, medical, psychological or other advice by a qualified medical health professional. Hosts and guests on the podcast express their own opinions, experiences and conclusions. And nothing on the podcast should be used to diagnose, treat, cure or prevent any medical conditions. The podcast is not intended to replace any medical or mental health treatment. All information and advice provided is for general well-being and does not take individual cases into consideration. Neither Tracy Saltis, guests on the podcast, or any sponsors endorse the opinions, views or conclusions expressed or shared on the podcast. Tracy Saltis takes no responsibility for any symptoms or consequences as a direct or indirect result of this podcast.